Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yes, hello, good afternoon all.
Good afternoon.
We'll be starting with the paper BEGE 106 today. The paper is titled Understanding Poetry. So we are into the world of English poetry from today onwards. We have 3 classes allotted to this particular paper. And I hope that I'll be able to complete the first 2 blocks today, the first 2 blocks. One pertaining to early modern English poets and the second one to long 18th century. The first block is titled Early Modern English Poets and the second is the long 18th century. So we'll begin with the first block. So shall we start?
Yes.
Yes, hello sister.
Yes, start.
Okay. So this particular paper we have with us is BEGE 106 as I told you and it's all about English poetry. At the very beginning of this paper in block 1, what is given is an introduction, a kind of a historical survey into English poetry, wherein you will be discussing the earlier attempts at writing poetry in the English language or in the land of England. See, all their names, all the names of the poets, their major works, everything has been discussed in detail in the historical survey in the introduction part of your textbook. So before preparing for your exams, what you can do is you can go through that introduction part and see, just look at who are the major writers, who are the major poets during the 14th century, the 15th century and the 16th century. What are their major works, major pieces of poetry which they have written. Everything you can go through. You won't be dealing with that today, but I'll be quickly moving on my focus into the first block, not on the introduction part, but on the first block, which is early modern period or early modern poets. Who are those people and what are their major works or contributions to English poetry that we are going to discuss today. If you have your textbooks with you, please open page number 29, which gives you the scope of the course or the syllabus. See, just look at the syllabus. I'll not be going through all the blocks today. I'll be discussing block 1 and 2 alone. Look at block 1, early modern period. First is the introductory unit, and then comes on meter and poetic devices. The third is on Shakespeare and his sonnets, sonnet number 29 and 30. Then comes John Milton. His 4 poems are being prescribed to you in the syllabus. John Donne's 3 poems are there. Then you have Andrew Marvell's 2 poems in block 1. In the second block, you have 4 poets and each poet's single poem is prescribed for you in this particular syllabus. The long 18th century is the name of the second block. So today we'll be discussing just these 2 blocks. Before we enter into the world of English poetry or this particular paper, I would like to tell you that, see, most of the people, most of the students find this paper difficult. See, it is just because they have not had a thorough preparation of the paper. Not because the paper is that difficult, but because they did not have a thorough analysis into the paper. If you find out previous year question papers, you will find, see, the pattern of the questions that are asked. See, once you understand the pattern, you can have your own selection of poets and works from among the almost 76 poems prescribed for you. 76 poems are prescribed for you out here. In block 1 and 2, you don't have much, but then you have many poems coming in the other blocks. See, in total, it is around 76 poems. And what is the pattern, the general pattern of this paper? Let us just quickly go through that. A sample is given in your textbook itself. A model question paper is given. How the question paper would look like. It's there in page number 32. See, the first question is relating to scansion of a given poetic piece stanza. See, scan one of the following passages and comment on its prosodic features is the first question. You will be given choices and you have to scan a given stanza of a poem that you have studied, and you'll have to scan it in terms of see what kind of a meter does this stanza have, all other things that we'll be discussing soon. So you have to scan it in terms of all the features that are present in the stanza, all the features in the sense the meter, the feet, see the stressed and the unstressed syllable, the pattern that they form, everything you will be discussing soon. And the second one, the subsection of question 1 is actually writing a short note on the sub-genres of poetry. See, we have different types of poems. The first, like you might know some of them. You might know sonnets, you might know limerick, you might know what is called epic, you might know elegy, ode. All these are different types of poems depending upon their length or depending upon the number of lines in them, whatever may be the criteria. These are different types of poems that you find. So you have to write a short note on any two of the following is the second B part of the first question. 5 options are there. Out of the 5, you have to write any 2 short notes. See, and the second question is pertaining to it's actually annotation, what we commonly know as annotation. You are given some 9 passages, 9 stanzas from different poems, and you are asked to find out the context and critically comment where necessary. Explain any 4 of the following passages with reference to their context. That means annotate. See, you have to find out from which poem this particular stanza has been taken. These stanzas are stanzas from the poems prescribed for you, don't worry. So, once you are thorough with all the poems in this particular textbook, you will be clearly able to understand, see which poem this stanza comes from or this particular piece comes from. So, once you understand the poem, you might remember the rhyme scheme and other peculiarities of the poem, and you have to write all about that. You have to write what those lines mean, place it in the context of the poem, with what reference these lines are mentioned. All those things you have to do in the second question. See, identifying the passages with reference to their context is the second question. So, enough choices are given. 9 choices are given and you have to attempt any 4. And the third part or the third question is with regard to a general comment on different periods of English poetry. Critically comment on Emily Legois's word. The great victories of Edward III were being sung in London, and Minnett's poems were current in the countryside when Chaucer was born and when his mind received its first impressions. See, this was the question. It is a general question on Chaucer and his poetry, nothing else. The question sounds to be quite different. You might be worried, excited about what the question is, but the question is simply about Chaucer and his contemporaries and his kind of poems. What kind of poems did Chaucer write? Which are his major works? All those things you have to write down as an essay. And then the next one, or the or question in the third section of the question paper is write short notes on, see, some moments are given, movements are given, and some poets are given, some ages are also given. See, we have different English literature or English poetry is divided into different ages. So you have the Restoration age, you have the Elizabethan age, you have the Augustan age. So different ages are there. So a general note, short note on any of the ages, or a general note on any of the poets that you have studied, or any of the movements that some of the poets may be part of. All such things may be asked as short questions. So you might be asked about the metaphysical school of poetry, metaphysical poets. See, you are already learning John Donne in the first block. So John Donne belongs to this particular school of poetry, which is known as the metaphysical school of poetry. So once you learn about John Donne, you will find out more about what metaphysical poetry is, what kind of features are found in metaphysical poetry, what are the major themes that these poets who are called the metaphysical poets, what kind of features, themes they deal with. All those things can be learned. So that is the third question, the or question in the third section. The fourth is actually again, see, an analysis of an evaluation of some given poets. See, 4 choices are given. Out of the 4, you have to write only one. So if you have a clever selection of the poets that you are going to learn, you are going to study well for your exams, you'll find out that the 4 choices given here, you might be very well knowing any of the two. നിങ്ങൾ നന്നായിട്ട് വായിച്ചവരാണെങ്കിൽ, നിങ്ങൾ ക്ലെവർ ചോയ്സ് നടത്തിയിട്ട് പ്രീവിയസ് ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ പേപ്പേഴ്സിന്റെ അടിസ്ഥാനത്തിലൊക്കെ പഠിച്ചവരാണെങ്കിൽ ഈ തന്നേക്കുന്നതിൽ ചിലപ്പം എലൻ ഗിൻസ്ബർഗ് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് അത്രയധികം ഫെമിലിയർ ആയിരിക്കാം, ചിലപ്പോൾ ആൻഡ്രൂ മാർവൽ ആയിരിക്കും ഫെമിലിയർ ആയിരിക്കും. ഏതെങ്കിലും ഒരാൾ എന്തായാലും നിങ്ങൾ ക്ലെവർ സെലക്ഷൻ നടത്തിയാൽ നിങ്ങളുടെ ആ സെലക്ഷനിൽ പെട്ടിട്ടുണ്ടാവാം. പഠിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് നിങ്ങൾ എല്ലാ പോയറ്റ്സിനെ കുറിച്ച് എല്ലാം പഠിക്കണം എന്ന് യാതൊരു നിർബന്ധവും ഇല്ല. So make a clever selection using the previous question papers. Once you do that, you will find that, see, the questions that you get will definitely have one of your favorite poets or one of the poets that you have chosen. And you can write a lot about that particular poet. So that is the fourth question, in which you have to evaluate the given from among the 4 poets, you have to evaluate any one poet. The fifth question is again evaluating one of the poems. So you will have you are given 4 choices again, and you have to write only one. So as I told you, if you look at previous question papers and make a clever selection, what happens is, see, most of these poems will be there in your list. And if these poems are there in your list, you can make your own choice which one you will be able to answer very well. The one which can score you enough marks. So you can pick that out of the 4 and you can write an evaluation of the poem. And then the 6th question is on a general idea about Victorian poetry and romantic poetry, kind of a comparison and contrast. See, do you agree with the view that Victorian poetry is a pale imitation of romantic poetry? Give reasons for your answer. So a general comparison and contrast between the Victorian poetry and romantic poetry is what is asked in the 6th part of your question paper, model question paper in your textbook. I told you it's there in page 34 if you are following. And then 7th one. Examine Langston Hughes's contribution to Harlem Renaissance. So you are going to learn Langston Hughes's poetry, maybe in the section on American poetry. And when you learn that, you will also learn what Harlem Renaissance is. So how or what connection does Langston Hughes have with Harlem Renaissance? You will have to learn about it, and you will definitely know about it, and then you can answer this question as well. Then you have the 8th question, which is actually on Indian English poetry. You have a separate block assigned for Indian English poetry. And here is a general essay on the different distinguishing features of Indian poetry in English. What are the distinguishing features of Indian English poetry? And you have to give suitable examples. You will be learning many Indian English poems, and you will have to find out what are the distinguishing features of Indian English poetry. So what makes it different from an English poem, or what makes it different from an American poem? That all these things you will be learning when you get further into this particular paper. See, do not worry. See, thinking that so many poems are there, so many poets are there, how am I going to learn them? Do not have any anxiety. We'll be covering it up one by one, so don't worry. Let us move on with the very first thing that we'll be learning today. And it is nothing but scansion. What do you mean by scansion? See, the second unit is on meter, scansion, and prosody. The first unit was the introductory unit. The second unit is on meter, scansion, and prosody. See, what do you mean by prosody? And what do you mean by meter? And what is scansion? How do you scan, or how do you find out the features of a given stanza of poetry? So, we are into page 39 where there is a description of all these three terms. Prosody. What is prosody? It is nothing but it is a part of grammar. See, in grammar, what do? We have a set of rules assigned to the grammar of each and every language, and those rules govern the language. Those rules tell us how we place subject before the verb and how we place object after the verb. How should the general structure of an English sentence be? Where do we place the adjective in a sentence? All these things, all the rules and regulations are given in the grammar of a particular language. But here what happens is, see, we are only looking into the poems. See, it's actually the grammar of poems. See, that part of grammar which deals with the laws governing the structure of verse. Verse is poetry. See, something which has a rhythmic pattern, a rhyme scheme, that is verse. Gadyam allathadandu adu padyam. പദ്യത്തിലെ ഗ്രാമർ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പദ്യത്തിലെ നിയമാവലിയെ ആണ് പ്രോസഡി എന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നത്. That part of grammar which deals with laws governing the structure of verse is called prosody. See, though prose also has this evaluation of prosody, we are not into that today. We are into the prosody of poetry. See, chiefly it is found in poetry. See, and then we have something called meter. What do you mean by when you scan or when you attempt scansion? These are the things that you are going to look at. You are going to look at the meter. What is the meter of a given poetic line? And what is meter actually? What do you mean by meter? Meter is nothing but the basic rhythmic structure of a line within a work of poetry. See, such a clear definition is not there in your textbook. If you want, you can write it down. Meter is the basic rhythmic structure, of a line within a work of poetry. This is the proper definition of meter. The basic rhythmic structure of a line within a work of poetry. See, and look at your textbook about meter. Meter measures the rhythm of a line of verse. So, what is the rhythm? How is it measured? That all those things that we are going to discuss now. See, let us quickly look at what is scansion and then go into how we measure poetic lines. How we scan, how we attempt what is called a scansion. See, scansion is nothing but, see, a kind of a scanning process. See, to scan, what does it mean? To look very carefully, to look intently at all the parts of a given poetic stanza. See, looking intently, looking very carefully. See, this is what radars do. Radars cause particular regions to be traversed by a controlled beam. See, we act as radars and we observe the poetic lines very carefully and find out the meter in it, find out the rhythm in it, the rhyme scheme in it, everything we find out. See, in prosody, scansion refers to metrical scanning of verse. When a unit of verse, whatever it be, maybe it is a foot, maybe it is a line of poetry, maybe it is a stanza, whenever it is scanned, we use certain symbols, and we can, by the use of certain symbols, we can actually see and hear what is called meter. So meter can be seen and heard when we scan a given piece of poetry using symbols. So that is what we are exactly going to do now. See, look at the symbols there. You have to be very familiar with these symbols if you are into the world of English poetry. See, the first symbol is actually a slanting line. Look at it. It's a slanting line. It is called the acute accent. And what does it indicate? It indicates the stressed syllable. Do you know what syllables are? See, syllables are nothing but, see, units of a word. See how many units a particular word, a given word can be broken into. That is called a syllable. And what do we base it upon, this division of a word? We base it upon the number of verbs in the given word. See, let me give you an example. If you are talking about the word photograph, see, the word is photograph. You can divide this word only into 3 units. Photo, and graph. 3 units. Photograph. See, I decided that it can be only broken into 3 units because I know that, see, all these words are divided into syllables based on the verbs present in them. I know that this word photograph has 3 verbs in it. Sorry, 3 vowel sounds in it. 3 vowel sounds in it. The first is fo. In fo, you have the O sound. In to, again, you have the O sound. And in graph, you have the R sound. So these 3 are vowel sounds present in the word photograph. So the word we can say that it is a trisyllabic word, or the word can be divided into 3 syllables. See, if we are talking about the word magnetic, the word alternative, 4 syllables. So it's a polysyllabic word. A word with more than 3 syllables is called a polysyllabic word. A word with 1 syllable is monosyllabic. A word with 2 syllables is disyllabic. A word with 3 is trisyllabic. So, the word magnetic is trisyllabic. The word alternative is polysyllabic. We are discussing page number 39. We are getting into what is called stress, what is called syllabic division, what is called stress. Unless you know syllabic division, you might not understand what is stress. That is why I am telling you more about syllables. How do we divide a word into syllables? I am telling you just now. We divide a word into syllables based on what is called the number of vowel sounds in it. See, the word examination. Look at the word examination. Examination. 5 syllables are there. I can say that the word examination has 5 syllables and it is a polysyllabic word. But, see, whatever may be the number of syllables in a given word, not all the syllables are pronounced with equal force when we pronounce it. So, നമ്മളൊരു വാക്കിനെ ഉച്ചരിക്കുന്ന സമയത്ത് വാക്കിലെ എല്ലാ സിലബിൾസിനും ഒരുപോലെ സ്ട്രെസ് ലഭിക്കാറില്ല. ഒരുപോലെ ഫോഴ്സോടെ ഒരേ ഫോഴ്സ് എല്ലാ സിലബിൾസും ഉച്ചരിക്കപ്പെടുന്നത് എന്ന് ഓർമ്മിക്കാം. അങ്ങനെ വരുമ്പം ഏത് പോർഷനാണോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഏത് സിലബിളിനാണോ സ്ട്രെസ് കിട്ടുന്നത് അതിനെ നമ്മൾ സ്ട്രെസ്ഡ് സിലബിൾ എന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നു. ഏതിനാണോ സ്ട്രെസ് ലഭിക്കാത്തത് അതിനെ നമ്മൾ unstressed syllable എന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നു. So this you have to keep in mind in order to understand the concept of what is called meter. See, based on the number of stressed and unstressed syllables in a given line, we have different meters in English, 5 different meters in English. See, look at the symbol now. The slight slanting line is the acute accent, or it is the symbol used to denote what is called the stressed syllable. Then you have the symbol of U there, page number 39 towards the end. The symbol of U is given. That indicates the unstressed syllable or the weak syllable. The name of the syllable is given. That is not that important. The symbol and the purpose is important. The slightly slanting line is stressed syllable. U denotes the unstressed syllable. Straight line denotes the division between feet. Double line denotes the pause or the caesura in the line. And the inverted V, the symbol of inverted V shows a rest. It is called a rest, and it indicates, see, that a syllable metrically expected is not actually present there. So we expect it there, but it is not actually actually present there. So don't worry about the last 3. You have to focus on the first 2. The first 2 means the stressed and the unstressed. The stressed is marked by a slightly slanting line, and the unstressed is marked by a U. See, the book is book number 1, block 1, page number 40. So types of meter. So based on the number of stressed and unstressed syllables in a given piece of poetry or in a given line of poetry, we have 5 different types of meters. See, 5 different types of meters. There are basically 5 types of meters. They are syllable stress or accented syllabic meter, strong stress meter, syllabic meter, and quantitative meter. Sorry, 4 different types, quantitative meter. See, syllable stress or accented syllabic meter, what does it mean? See, the smallest unit of meter in poetry is foot. And how do you define a foot in English poetry or in English prosody? Foot in prosody is a pattern of phonetically stressed and unstressed syllables. See, a regular pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables can be seen before you in the given words. See, look at the way. The first pattern is the unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed 4 times. And it is labeled as iambic. We call it the iambic feet. 4 principal feet found in English verse are the iambic, trochee, anapaced, and dactyl. This is BA English, BEGE 106 is the paper, Risla. Okay. Moving on. Iambic is the first type of 106, BEGE 106, page number 40, block 1. So iambic feet refers to the pattern of the unstressed and stressed syllables. If you have a regular pattern of the unstressed and the stressed, the unstressed coming first and the stressed following, and there is a repeated pattern of the unstressed and the stressed, we call it the iambic feet. So you have 4 principal feet found in English poetry. The first is iambic, which is actually a repeated pattern of unstressed and stressed syllable. The first is the unstressed and the second is the stress. Look at the word there. See, you have words like appear, behold, attack, supply. How do I pronounce them? When I pronounce them, I do not. See, actually all these words are disyllabic. All these words have two syllables. How do you understand it? Appear, behold, attack, and supply. So all these given words, they have two syllables. When I pronounce the first syllable, I am not stressing it. Appear, appear. The first syllable is not at all pronounced with force. The second is pronounced with force. That is why U and then the slanting line. That means the first syllable is unstressed and the second is stressed. So this is how you denote the stressed and the unstressed. In behold, see, when I say behold, force is given to the hold part. The word, the syllable hold. B is not that heard. Hold is heard much. Behold. Attack. Attack is the part which is heard aloud. Or I pronounce it with much force. In the word supply, again, ply is given more stress. That is why it is marked as unstressed and then stressed. See, page number 40, types of meter is the title given. See, there may be changes in the page numbers, probably. That might be the reason you are getting confused, but don't worry about the paper or the page. You'll have it there. You have it there in your block 1. The second unit actually, and page 40. I have a very old copy of the textbook with me. That is why the numbers might change. So remember, the lesson is, the unit is 2. We are into 2.3 types of meters. The first one we have discussed, the first foot, principal foot in English verse is iambic, which is actually a repetition of the unstressed and the stressed. Quite opposite to it is the second one, which is trochee. Here, you will have words with the first syllable stressed and the second syllable unstressed. How do I read it? Tiger. Tie receives the stress and ger is not pronounced with much force. Tiger. Up, holy. Ho is stressed and li is not. Grandeur. Grand is stressed and ear is not. So you have a repeated pattern of the unstressed and the stressed in the feet, which is termed trochee. Trochee is the feet. Then you have the third one, which is named anapaest. In anapaest, repeated two unstressed syllables followed by a stressed syllable will be seen. So two unstressed syllables will be lying next to each other and it will be followed by a stressed syllable in an anapaest feet. So in the word understand, both are not stressed. Understand, both are not stressed. And are not stressed and stand is stressed. See, colonnade, la is not stressed and nade is stressed. Reappear, is not stressed, is not stressed, appear is stressed. So in all these words, you have a pattern which shows two unstressed syllables with a stressed syllable at the end. The fourth one is quite the opposite of the anapaest, wherein you will have the stressed syllable followed by two unstressed syllables. That means in these words, the first syllable is stressed and the next two are not. See, look at the word messenger. Messenger. So me is stressed and sen and j are not. Property. Pro is stressed, per and t are not. So these words given here, they are trisyllabic. Desperate, messenger, property, infamous. This is how you divide the words. And when you divide the words into syllable, you'll find that the first syllable is stressed and the rest of the two are unstressed. So these are the four major principal feet found in English verse. So keep that in mind, because this you definitely need when you attempt what is called a scansion. See, you'll be given a stanza and you have to decide which word can be divided into how many syllables and which is the stressed one, which is the unstressed one. You will have to decide then and there when you scan or when you attempt what is called a scansion, which is the first part of your question paper on BEGE 106. So now, look at the way they have attempted one of the samples on scansion. See, the stanza from one of the poems by Dryden is given. With ravished ears, the monarch hears, assumes the god, effect to nod, and seems to shake the spheres. This is the stanza. A stanza is given to you from John Dryden, the poet John Dryden. So when you look at the lines in the tale, or when you scan it, you will find that there is a regular pattern of the unstressed and the stressed coming in each line. With this unstressed, in the word ravished, you have the first syllable stressed and the second unstressed. And then the word years is also stressed. So there is a repetition of the pattern unstressed and stressed throughout the stanza. So this is a stanza in the iambic meter. So you'll have to write like this. If this stanza is given in your exam and you are asked to scan things, you are asked to attempt scansion, you will be marking these symbols. You will be finding out which word is stressed, which syllable is stressed, and marking them using the symbols U and the slanting line. If it is unstressed, mark it as U. If it is stressed, mark it as with a slanting line. So this is what you do in scansion. I hope it is clear to you. So once you scan, you will have to write down that the given stanza is in the iambic meter. So this is how you scan things. So umpteen number of examples are given there in your textbook. You can follow. You can look at each and every example and learn them, find out what is the pattern followed. You can learn some important lines from some poems as examples and keep them in mind. That can be done when you learn what is called a scansion. See, and let me tell you that in English poetry, the most common meter is the iambic pentameter. The most commonly used meter is the iambic pentameter. That means unstressed syllable followed by stressed. There is a pattern of unstressed syllable followed by stressed. And it will have 5 units. The first line itself will have 5 repetition of the unstressed and the stressed. So that is why it is called iambic pentameter. Penta means 5. See, remember your nursery rhymes. Tinkle, tinkle, little star. If you are talking about that particular nursery rhyme, remember tinkle. The first one is, unstressed, and the second is stressed, tinkle. Such things can be done. You can at least go through your nursery rhymes, find out the stressed and the unstressed in the nursery rhymes. This is another way you can learn how to identify the stressed and the unstressed. Very familiar nursery rhymes can be taken and you can find out the stressed and the unstressed syllables. The pattern in the nursery rhyme can be found out. And most commonly used, as I told you, in English poetry, the most commonly used meter is the iambic pentameter. So keep that also in mind. Now into the next section. See, what do you mean by pentameter? What do you mean by tetrameter, hexameter? Everything is given there in page number 44 towards the end. See, the number of feet determines whether it is diameter, that means 2 feet, whether it is tetrameter, 3 feet, 4 feet, trimeter, 3 feet, 5 meter, see, 5 feet is pentameter, 6 feet is hexameter, 7 feet is septameter. So this is how you name them according to the number of feet in them. You have several examples in the exercises to learn how to scan or how to attempt a question on scansion. So you can go through them very carefully and find out and learn for yourself. I have given you exactly how we do things. I have given you a rough idea, not a rough one, but a very clear idea of how things are done. But it is up to you to learn them well by looking at all the samples given in your textbook, in the exercises as well as in the notes. So now into the next section, which is on rhyme and rhythm in poetry. What do you mean by rhyme and what do you mean by rhythm? So if you have been in any of my other classes, you might have heard me saying that English is a language which is governed by its rhythm. It's a language which is governed by its rhythm. That means the flow of the language depends on its rhythm. Stress-timed rhythm. It has a stress-timed rhythm. That means the stress, see, in words, they actually provide rhythm to the language. It has a stress-timed rhythm. So we have already learned what stress is. So the number of stressed and unstressed syllables in a given line, she gives it a kind of a pattern, a wave-like movement while we pronounce it. So this is what gives it rhythm. So there is a regular repetition of stressed and unstressed syllables. Sometimes two unstressed will be followed by a stressed one. Sometimes one stressed will be followed by two unstressed ones. So when I'm speaking, see, the rhythm that you might hear, the wave-like movement that you hear is nothing but the rhythm, and it is created by the stress. It is created by the stress. So English is a language which is governed by a stress-timed rhythm. So keep that in mind. So rhythm is nothing but the flow, the wave-like movement. അതിന്റെ താളാത്മകതയാണ് പറയുന്നത് അല്ലെ rhythm എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. See, rhythm helps to what are the different ways in which rhythm is created, or what are the different constituents of rhythm? See, one of the most important constituent we have just seen, which is meter. See, other factors which give rhythm to the language or the poetry of English is alliteration, assonance, consonance, onomatopoeia. All these are other features which give rhythm to this particular language, which is English. What is alliteration? Alliteration is nothing but the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words, beginning of stressed syllables in nearby words. അടുത്തടുത്ത് കിടക്കുന്ന വാക്കുകളിൽ കോൺസണന്റ് സൗണ്ട്സിന്റെ റെപ്പിറ്റീഷനെയാണ് എലിട്രേഷൻ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ അതൊരു താളാത്മകത നൽകുന്നുണ്ട് ആ ഒരു ഭാഷയ്ക്ക്. സി ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ, she sells shells on the seashore. നമ്മൾ അങ്ങനെ ഒരു ടങ് ട്വിസ്റ്റർ ഉണ്ട്. See, look at the repetition of the sir sound. Sir is a consonant sound. She sells seashells on the seashore. See, this is a tongue twister, but a very good example for alliteration, where the consonant sound sir is repeated in nearby words. So consonant sound in a repetition, വാക്കുകളുടെ തുടക്കത്തില് ഒരു സെന്റൻസിൽ, ഒരു പോയമിൽ, ഒരു സെന്റൻസിൽ കാണുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ആ പോയമിൽ ലിറ്ററേഷൻ ഉണ്ട് എന്നാണ് നമ്മൾ പറയാ. അത് വൊവൽ സൗണ്ട്സ് ആണെങ്കിൽ ആ പോയമിൽ എസനൻസ്, ആ ലൈൻസിൽ എസനൻസ് ഉണ്ട് എന്നാണ് പറയാ. അത് അഥവാ എന്താ പറയാ, നേച്ചറില്, പ്രകൃതിയിലെ സൗണ്ട്സ് അതേപോലെ റിപ്പീറ്റഡ് ആയിട്ടാണ് നമ്മൾ കേൾക്കുന്നതെങ്കിൽ അതിനെ ഓണോപോട്ടോപോയിക് വേർഡ്സ് എന്നാണ് പറയാ. അതും ഈ ഒരു ഭാഷയ്ക്ക് താളാത്മകത നൽകുന്നുണ്ട്. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ, the word his, buzz, these are sounds directly taken from nature. His is the sound made by the reptiles, snakes. Buzz is the sound made by bees, they buzz. So these sounds are directly taken from nature, and such sounds, when used in a piece of a poem, it gives rhythm to the poem. So this is how rhythm is created. These are the different elements which create rhythm in a language like English. See, and then we have something called the rhyme scheme. See, rhyme scheme is nothing but identity of sounds at the end of lines of words. See, when words with same sounds appear at the end of two adjacent sentences, we say that there is a rhyme scheme. Look at the page 51. Page 51, the last sentence given there, the last two lines from John Dryden's poem Religio Laici. Religio Laici is the poem and John Dryden is the poet. His two lines from his poem are given there as example for rhyme scheme. Faith is not built on disquisitions vain. The last word is vain, and look at the way the second sentence has the last word as plain, vain and plain. See, day, may, night, sight, fight. So repetition of such words at the end of lines. Words, pair of words which rhyme, or pair of words which have similar sounds in them. So if such a thing happens, we say that the word has the given lines have a rhyme scheme. See, rhyme schemes may be of different types. The examples are given there. If you have a stanza and the first two lines, end of the first two lines rhyme, we say that the rhyme scheme is AA. And the next two lines have another rhyme scheme, another set of words which look alike or which are pronounced alike. We say that the stanza has a rhyme scheme of AA and BB. So this is how you identify the rhyme scheme. See, sometimes it happens that the first and the third line will have similar sounding words at the end. In such cases, what do we say? We say that the rhyme scheme is AB, AB. The rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B. So that is also another example for a rhyme scheme. Rhyme scheme is nothing but the pattern in terms of the rhyming words, words which rhyme or which are pronounced almost similar. See, if you have rhyming words within a line, within the same line, we call it the internal rhyme. See, if we have words which rhyme only in appearance, that means which actually do not rhyme, but which look like they rhyme. See, words like, look at the word ALONE and DONE. See, somebody who does not know the actual pronunciation of these two words, he might at one look say that these two words rhyme. So this is a rhyme which is just there in appearance. It is not there in case of pronunciation. So such a rhyme is called I rhyme. That means we can just see it. We find that it is somewhat similar, but it is actually not. See, the word alone. See, though the spelling looks like somewhat rhyming, they are pronounced differently. The word alone and the word done. How do we say that these are pronounced as the same? Never. Alone and done. So they are not pronounced the same. They do not have any rhyme scheme, but they appear to be rhyming. That is why they are examples for what is called I rhyme. E-Y-E, I rhyme. So all this is mentioned in page number 52 in your textbook. You can further read into the different types of rhyme in your textbook. See, something what is of importance as literature students is rhyme royale. See, rhyme royale is something which Geoffrey Chaucer, one of the 14th century, major 14th century poets, he introduced into English. Rhyme royale is the name of the rhyme scheme. Rhyme royale was used by Chaucer for the first time in English in his poem Troilus and Procede. The rhyme scheme of a 7-line stanza in rhyme royale is A, B, B, and C, C. So this is the rhyme pattern or rhyme scheme found in rhyme royale, which was introduced by Chaucer in his poems during the 14th century. See, and then you have what is called Ottawa Rima. This is also important, Ottawa Rima. It was introduced into English poetry by someone named Thomas Watt, W-Y-A-T-T. It's there in page 54, the first one, Ottawa Rima, introduced by Thomas Watt into English poetry, wherein the rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, and C, C. So remember these names, they are important. Ottawa Rima, rhyme royale. You might be asked short notes on them. I told you, you might be asked short notes based on these topics. So these are some of the possible areas from which short notes might come. So the next is the Spenserian stanza, introduced after Edmund Spenser. 16ാം നൂറ്റാണ്ടിലെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട കവിയായിരുന്ന എഡ്മണ്ട് സ്പെൻസർ കൊണ്ടുവന്ന ഒരു റൈമിംഗ് പാറ്റേൺ ആണ് സ്പെൻസീരിയൻ സ്റ്റാൻസ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. See, there you have 9 lines and the rhyme scheme is A, B, C, B, and C, C. So this is the rhyming scheme of a Spenserian stanza. See, and then you have something very familiar maybe, which is a sonnet. Sonnet is nothing but a small poem of 14 lines. 14 വരിയിലെ ചെറിയ കവിതയാണ് സോണറ്റ് എന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നത്. Many of the English poets have attempted writing sonnets. The first one, or the major one, of course, is Shakespeare, who wrote 154 sonnets. All his sonnets are just numbered. No names are given to them, but sometimes we know them after their first line. ആ കവിതകളുടെ ആദ്യ വരിയിലൂടെ ആ കവിതകളെ, ആ സോണറ്റ്സിനെ നമ്മൾ തിരിച്ചറിയാറുണ്ട്. പക്ഷെ സാധാരണ ഷേക്സ്പിയറിന്റെ സോണറ്റ്സിനെ എല്ലാം തന്നെ അവരുടെ നമ്പറിലാണ് അറിയപ്പെടുന്നത്. നിങ്ങൾക്ക് സോണറ്റ് 29ഉം 30ഉമാണ് പ്രിസ്ക്രൈബ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളത്. See, sonnet is nothing but a poem of 14 lines. And how does this 14 lines come? See, it may be a division of 8 plus 4, or it may be a division of, what do you say, 3 quatrains. That means 4 lined 3 stanzas and the rest coming as the couplet. See, 3 quatrains, that makes 12, and then the last 2 makes a couplet. So it may be a division of 8 plus 6, or a division of what is called 3 quatrains and a couplet. So വ്യത്യസ്തമായ രീതിയിലാണ് സോണറ്റ്സിൽ സെന്റൻസസിനെ അറേഞ്ച് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. ചിലപ്പോൾ ആദ്യത്തെ 8 വരികളെ ഒന്നിച്ച് ചേർത്തുകൊണ്ട് ഒക്ടേവ് എന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നു, പിന്നീടുള്ളതിനെ ലെറ്റർ സെറ്റ് എന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നു. അങ്ങനെയും ഡിവിഷൻ ഉണ്ടാവാം. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ 3 quatrains, that means 3 stanzas of 4 lines each, that makes 12, and then a couplet. സോ അങ്ങനെയും സോണറ്റ്സിന് ഡിവിഷൻ ഉണ്ടാവാം. അപ്പൊ വ്യത്യസ്തമായ ആളുകള് വ്യത്യസ്തമായ രീതിയിലാണ് ഈ സോണറ്റ്സിനൊക്കെ സീക്വൻസ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളത്, സോണറ്റ്സിനൊക്കെ സ്റ്റാൻസൈക് ഡിവിഷൻസ് നടത്തിയിട്ടുള്ളത്. See, in a Petrarchan sonnet, you will find the octave and the sestet, which means 8 lines put together and the rest 6 put together. The first 8 are known as the octave and the rest of the 6 sentences, they are known as the sestet. In a Shakespearean sonnet, you have the division as 3 quatrains and a couplet. 3 quatrains means 4 lines. So 3 stanzas of 4 lines, that makes 12, and a couplet, a rhyming couplet. That means the 2 sentences, the remaining 2 sentences, they will be rhyming. So you'll have to learn all these things. Petrarchan sonnet endane, Shakespearean sonnet endane, Spenserian sonnet endane, എന്താണ് അവർ തമ്മിലുള്ള റൈം സ്കീമിലെ വ്യത്യാസം, അറേഞ്ച്മെന്റിലെ സെന്റൻസസിന്റെ സ്റ്റാൻസേഴ്സിന്റെ അറേഞ്ച്മെന്റിലെ വ്യത്യാസം എന്താണ്, അതൊക്കെ നിങ്ങൾ പഠിക്കേണ്ടതാണ്. BA ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് സ്റ്റുഡൻസ് തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും പഠിക്കേണ്ടതാണ്. So keep that in mind. All these different sonnets, types of sonnets and their rhyme scheme are very, very important as literature students. Keep them in mind. So with that, almost we come to the end of the first unit. All other things you can just go through. All the important ones I have tried to cover. And that was the most difficult part in this particular paper actually. How to teach you scansion, how to teach you what is stress, what is syllable, what is rhyme scheme, what is rhythm. See, that was the heaviest task for me today. I think I have done some justice to my responsibility. I have actually tried to tell you everything in clear. And once you go through this audio clipping in the IGNOU Vadagara YouTube channel and then read this textbook of yours, you might get a very clear idea, I suppose. So I hope that it is very beneficial to you. So now into the world of poems actually. And it is unit 3, William Shakespeare's sonnets. See, I told you William Shakespeare's sonnets are numbered. In total, he has written 154 sonnets. And some of them, very popular ones, they are known with the, see, they have no names, but the first line becomes their name. The first line of the sonnet becomes its name. So more into William Shakespeare and his kind of sonnets. See, all his graphical details are given. You can go through them. Since it's the paper on poetry, I'll concentrate on the given sonnets and the theme in the sonnet, etc. Biographical details I'm not getting into. I'll be simply talking about Shakespearean sonnets, their pattern, the theme, major themes in his poem, in his sonnets, all those things we'll be discussing. So look at page 73, Shakespeare's sonnets. I told you Shakespearean sonnet has the division of an octave and a sestet. That means the first 8 lines are put together as a stanza and the next 6 lines are put together as another stanza. അങ്ങനെ 2 divisions ആണ് ഉണ്ടാവുക. ആ divisionsil rhyming pattern എങ്ങനെയാണെന്നുള്ളതാണ് മനസ്സിലാക്കേണ്ടത്. It is it is AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, and GG. That means in the first stanza, the first and the third will rhyme, and the second and the fourth will rhyme. Again, in the next stanza, the first and the third line will rhyme, and the second and the fourth will rhyme. And in the third stanza again, the first and the third will rhyme and the second and the fourth will rhyme. That is the pattern. And towards the end, you have a double line. See, GG. which is a couplet, which is, see, rhyming in nature. Sorry. Petrarchan sonnet was it has the pattern of octave and sestet. Shakespearean sonnet has a pattern of three quatrains and a couplet. It was very big mistake that I made. Sorry for that. I got confused. So Shakespearean sonnets have a pattern of three quatrains and a couplet. And it is rhyme schemed as AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, and GG. So this is the rhyme scheme of a Shakespearean sonnet. And I told you in total he wrote 154 sonnets. Out of the 154 sonnets, you see your syllabus has only 2 to be learned in detail. The sonnet number 29 and 30. Now let us look into the major themes in Shakespearean sonnets. See, Shakespeare's sonnets were not published during his lifetime. It was published towards the end of his life. Maybe, see, he died in 1616 and it was Thomas Thorpe, his friend, who published them in 1609 without his permission. He did not want his sonnets to be published because they were so personal to him. He never wanted them to be shown to people. But his friend Thomas Thorpe published them in 1609 without his permission. That is one thing you have to keep in mind. See, this is normally asked for your qualifying examinations. When you write exams like NET or SET, see, this is normally asked, who was the person who published Shakespearean sonnets? So Thomas Thorpe is the answer, and the collection is, it came out in 1609. And then you have two famous mysterious figures to whom these sonnets are addressed. You might have heard of them. One is the fair youth and the other is the dark lady. These two figures are supposedly the people whom these sonnets are addressed. ഷേക്സ്പിയറിന്റെ സോണറ്റ്സ് ഇവർക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടുള്ളതാണ്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇവരെ മനസ്സിൽ ധ്യാനിച്ചുകൊണ്ടാണ് ഷേക്സ്പിയർ കവിതകൾ ഈ സോണറ്റ്സ് എഴുതിയിട്ടുള്ളത് എന്നാണ് പറയപ്പെടുന്നത്. See, the first 127 sonnets were addressed to the fair youth. 127 സോണറ്റ് 154 സോണറ്റ്സിൽ 127 സോണറ്റ്സ് ഫെയർ യൂത്തിന് ഡെഡിക്കേറ്റ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളതാണ്. മറ്റ് സോണറ്റ്സ് ഡാർക്ക് ലേഡിക്ക് ഡെഡിക്കേറ്റ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളതാണ്. ഈ രണ്ട് കൂട്ടർ ആരാണ് എന്നുള്ള കാര്യത്തിൽ ഒരുപാട് വിവാദങ്ങൾ, ഒരുപാട് പേരുകൾ നമ്മൾ കേൾക്കും. ഈ ഫെയർ യൂത്ത് ആരാണെന്നും അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ഡാർക്ക് ലേഡി ആരാണെന്നുള്ള കാര്യത്തിൽ ഒരുപാട് വിവാദങ്ങൾ നിലവിൽ ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുള്ളതാണ്. സി, so remember, the first 127 sonnets, wait a second, as I told you, to the fair youth and the rest to the dark lady. And what do these sonnets have as theme? These sonnets have love as the theme. They have the love, personal attachment or love as the theme, most of them. They might talk of very personal emotions of the person, the speaker. They are amatory in character. Many of them are amatory in character. They speak about love. See, it is in these sonnets, in all these sonnets, that Shakespeare bared his soul, that is, he opened up his soul to the people, and he never wanted them to be published. See, when they were published, he faced lots of embarrassment. He must have, see, his soul, he must have found their publication quite embarrassed. He never wanted them to be published. That means he was quite embarrassed by seeing all his very personal emotions published by Thomas Thorpe. See, there is a discussion on the nature of these sonnets. See, Shakespeare's expression of love in the Fair Youth sonnets are more Platonic than sexual. So keep that in mind. See, sonnet number 18 is given as example. And in when you talk of the Shakespearean pattern or the Shakespearean sonnet, I told you 3 quatrains and a couplet, and there is necessarily something called the volta, a turn in the opening of the 3rd quatrain. See, the 9th line actually is a turn. That means that the idea discussed in the first 8 lines, see, there will be a break in that, and then the idea discussed in the next lines, they will be changing. The idea will not be the same. There is a turn in the opening of the 3rd quatrain. That means the 9th line is known as the volta. So you might be asked, what is volta in Shakespearean sonnet? See, the opening in the 3rd quatrain or the 9th line is known as volta or turn. See, what is turning? The focus of the speaker is turning from one idea to another. See, and his sonnets dedicated to the dark lady, they are sexual in appeal. So that is also mentioned. Now into the 2 sonnets prescribed for you. The first one is sonnet 29 and the second is sonnet 30. See, what does sonnet 29 discuss? See, in sonnet 29, he talks about the way in which he had lost everything, the way he actually lost all his fortune. He is a loser, he became a loser. But see, what actually consoles him, or what actually gives him some kind of consolation, is his friend. See, when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least, yet in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply. Yes, sonnet 29 and 30 are there in page number 75. Haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. See, in both these sonnets, what he recounts is his losses. All that he has lost many of his dearest friends, he has lost many opportunities, his unfulfilled ambitions. See, everything that he has been a failure at are mentioned in both these sonnets. See, but in sonnet 29, Shakespeare seems to bemoan certain qualities and influence he could not acquire. See, that he could not acquire certain qualities which his contemporaries had. അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ കാലഘട്ടത്തിൽ ജീവിച്ച മറ്റു പലർക്കും ഇല്ല പല കഴിവുകളും എനിക്ക് കിട്ടാതെ പോയല്ലോ എന്നതിന്റെ വിലാപം, ഒരു സങ്കടം പറയുന്നതായിട്ടാണ് സോണറ്റ് 29 കാണുന്നത്. See, he says, desiring this man's art and that man's scope. See, ഇയാളുടെ കല അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇയാളുടെ സാധ്യതകൾ രണ്ടും എനിക്ക് കിട്ടിയില്ലല്ലോ എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ ഒരു വിലാപം നമുക്ക് സോണറ്റ് 29 കാണാൻ സാധിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. Whereas in sonnet 30, see, he sighs the lack of many a thing he sought. That means, see, he is actually not that much bothered about the things that he did not get. And there is an indication that, see, whenever he finds, he remembers his friend, all that he has lost or all that he has not acquired, he does not have any regret about them. See, see, in the sonnet 29, his experience is more intense. In sonnet 30, what he says is, see, whenever I remember my friend, see, I forget all my losses. See, but if I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. The last couplet in sonnet 30, the last two lines, look at it. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. So all my sorrows are put to an end when I think of thee. So he is actually addressing his dear friend, and he is saying that, see, once your thoughts come up to my mind, I stop thinking of all my losses and the things that I could not ever achieve. So both these sonnets are on the theme of memory. The first one is rich in passion. The latter is restrained in emotion. See, but in sonnet 30, there is an indication that his friend in mention is all in all to him. Someone whose memory or whose, see, thinking of whom can console him to the utmost. See, we can't go line by line because we have so many poems to be discussed. So what you can do is you can go through the sonnets, read them thoroughly. You will have umpteen number of, see, write-ups on these sonnets or videos discussing these sonnets. You can go through them in order to find more about them. Your text also helps you much in learning the ideas given in the sonnet. I'm just giving you a glimpse of it. I just told you that these two sonnets are actually bemoaning the losses that he has had in life. That means the way he lost many dear and near ones, he lost many opportunities. All those things are discussed in both the sonnets. But in sonnet 30, see, he says that, see, just a memory of his son, of his friend, his very dear friend, what happens is all his losses are restored and sorrows are put to an end. With just the thinking of his dear friend makes him restore all the losses and end up his sorrows. So that is mentioned in sonnet 30. So that is all about Shakespeare and his sonnets. You have to read more and more about these people. I'm just giving you just a rough idea, because I cannot stop at one particular poem and keep saying more and more about it. I have much and much to say about all these poems, but see, you have to, or we have to rush with all the other poems in the syllabus as well. So prepare well. Now into John Milton. See, once you hear the name John Milton, what are the poems that come to your mind? John Milton is the person who wrote Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, two very popular epics in English. See, two very popular epics in English, which talks about the first sin. See, but that poem, or Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, all these very famous contributions of Milton are not prescribed for you. Maybe you'll have them in your PG, at your PG level. You have 2 poems of Milton prescribed, actually 4. The first 2 are La Allegro and Il Penseroso. La Allegro and Il Penseroso. They are actually known as the companion poems. And then you have 2 other poems, On the Late Massacre in Piedmont, and the next one, When the Assault was Intended on the City. See what theme is there in this set of poems or the companion poems. Let us quickly look at. So you'll have to read about who Milton is, what are the features of his writing, what are his contributions to English poetry, what are his other contributions. He has written masques, he has written critical pieces, critical essays. So you have to keep them in mind. His literary career is actually divided into 4 periods. That is mentioned in your textbook: the college period, the Horton period, the period of religious and political controversies, the period of great epics. This is what I mentioned. The period of great epics, the period in which he wrote the 2 greatest of English epics, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, of which he is very, very famous. So into the poems prescribed for us. The 2 poems of Milton prescribed for us are La Allegro and Il Penseroso. La Allegro means the happy man. It's an Italian word which means happy man, and Il Penseroso means the melancholy man. See, both these poems, they are known as companion poems. I already told you that. They depict a similar day spent in contemplation and thought. See, it's a pastoral poem. Pastoral poem, what do you mean? Pastoral poems are poems in which characters are actually shepherds. So they are given the role of shepherds who rear sheep, who work on the fields, on the grasslands throughout the day. So that kind of a characterization of the speakers is given in the pastoral poems. A pastoral setting is laid down where the characters are shepherds. See, La Allegro means the happy person, the happy man, and Il Penseroso means the melancholy man or the sorrowful man. See, sometimes we say that it is a thoughtful person. See, the first one talks about an idealized day in the country of a happy person who is enjoying all the festive evenings in the city. And then the second poem, Il Penseroso, talks about a thoughtful person whose night is filled with meditative walking in the woods. He walks in the woods and he is full of meditative thoughts. And see, and hours of study in a lonely tower. So all his melancholic ideas are given way to in the poem Il Penseroso. So melancholic man or thoughtful person, he keeps meditating in the woods, in the forest, walking in the forest, and he also sits in the lonely tower in his study in the lonely tower in order to contemplate or meditate. So these are the 2 poems which are known as the companion poems. Remember, and the major themes I've told you what is there in these 2 poems. So one talks of the happy situation of a person, another talks of the melancholic nature of the person in mention, how the person sits and broods. He has very serious thoughts on life. See, an appreciation of these poems are given at the end of the chapter. You can go through them. See, every time you read the poem, please read all the lines very carefully and then quickly skip on to the appreciation part of the poem given in your textbook towards the end of the lesson. So that would be a much easy way of learning this particular paper. So once you look at the poem, go through all the lines of the poem very carefully and then come to the discussion part, the appreciation part of the poems. Read them well. So that would be a good way to prepare. So please make notes as and when you study. എപ്പോഴാണോ പഠിക്കുന്നത് എങ്ങനെയാണോ പഠിക്കുന്നത് നന്നായിട്ട് നോട്ട്സ് പ്രിപ്പയർ ചെയ്യുക. നിങ്ങളെ ടെക്സ്റ്റിലെ സെന്റൻസസിനെ മാത്രം ആശ്രയിക്കാതെ പുറത്തുനിന്ന് ആണെങ്കിലും ഈ കവിതകളെ കുറിച്ച് എക്സ്ട്രാ എന്ത് മെറ്റീരിയൽ കിട്ടുന്നു അതിനെയൊക്കെ വായിച്ചിട്ട് നോട്ട്സ് പ്രിപ്പയർ ചെയ്യുന്നത് നല്ലതായിരിക്കും. സമയം കിട്ടും. പോയിന്റ്സ്, see you can just put down points and keep them in mind so that you can develop them as an essay question or a paragraph question if need be in your exams. So keep that in mind. Now into the third poem by Milton, which is On the Late Massacre at Piedmont. On the Late Massacre at Piedmont is a sonnet. See, we have so many sonneteers in English literature, in English poetry. We have the first, see, this poetic form, sonnet, first existed in Italy, or it was found in the poems of Petrarch, Italian poet Petrarch. And there are, see, during the Renaissance period, what happened? Scholars from England, they went to Italy, see, and they brought samples of, see, literary pieces, all the cultural elements from Italy to England. And this is how sonnet came into English literature. And the people who were behind it, they are Sir Thomas Watt and Earl of Surrey. So after them, they have written sonnets. After them, we have people like Edmund Spenser. We have Philip Sidney, who have been writing sonnets. They have sonnet collection of 108 sonnets and 88 sonnets. So many sonnets they have a collection of. We have Shakespeare himself writing 154 sonnets. We have also Milton writing sonnets. We have William Wordsworth, who writes sonnets. So many sonneteers are there in English poetry, in English literature. So this is another sonnet from John Milton. See, the sonnet is inspired by the massacre of Valdencian in Piedmont by Charles Emmanuel II, Duke of Savoy. See, what he did is, see, this Duke, Charles Emmanuel II, Duke of Savoy, see, he actually, indulged in a massacre. See, many of the people were killed together by this person's orders, Charles Emmanuel II's orders. Piedmont is a region of Italy, which especially at that time was a strongly Catholic country. So maybe because of religious disagreements or because of many other reasons, what happened? Duke of Savoy, Charles Emmanuel II, he actually ordered a massacre, a large-scale massacre. Many people were killed. See, annoyed with the people's choice against Catholicism, the troops unleashed an unprovoked campaign of loot, rape, torture, and murder. So this was done by the orders of Duke of Savoy, Charles Emmanuel II. So many people were raped, many people were tortured, murdered. Page number 98, 4.4. The third poem by John Milton, page number 98, on the late massacre in Piedmont. So because of religious disagreements, see, many people were raped, many were looted, tortured, murdered. So almost 2000 people were killed and almost 2000 of them were converted. Forcibly they were converted to the Catholic faith. They did not want to follow the Catholic faith, but they were forced to follow the Catholic faith by Duke of Savoy, Charles Emmanuel II. And based on this particular incident, Milton wrote this sonnet which is titled On the Late Massacre in Piedmont. ഈ ഒരു സോണറ്റ് എഴുതിയത് ഈ ഒരു ഇൻസിഡന്റിനെ ആസ്പദമാക്കിയിട്ടാണ്. The largest theme of the sonnet is of course religion, but with a view to enact justice. See, religion is there, but he also wants justice to take place or justice to rule. There is also a movement from the Old Testament to the New Testament. There is a comparison between the theme of vengeance in the Old Testament to the theme of regeneration in the New Testament. For religious theme it is based on the incident of the large-scale massacre at Piedmont. On the late massacre at Piedmont. In Piedmont nilladana sonnet-inde pere. See, it has the theme of good, pious people trapped in a dark world. See, people are trapped in a dark world, and what is the solution to this darkness? How these people can be saved of this darkness? That comes out as a theme to this poem. The struggles of the good and the evil are set up as a theme. Freedom and oppression make their presence in this poem. And how, religion is actually shown, or religion is actually suggested as a means of escape. How religion or faith can save people. That is also in mention. He discusses all the sorrows and anger of the victims. And he also suggests that religion is something which can be a savior to them. See, this is a sonnet and it has the rhyme scheme ABBA, ABBA, CD, CD, and CD. The rhyme scheme in this particular sonnet is like this. It is there in page number 100 in bold in capital letters ABBA, ABBA, CD, CD, CD. See, this poem or this sonnet is also known as Sonnet 18. It is written in iambic pentameter. I told you iambic pentameter is the meter, the food which is most often used in English poems. So rhyme scheme you have to remember. All the other details of the poem you can go through in your textbook or from outside. See, it's not necessary that you always follow the lines given in the textbook itself when you are discussing poetry. You can also go for other sources which discuss this particular poem in detail, and then you can jot down your own points and you can combine all those points together as a paragraph or as an essay question for your exam. ഇതിൽ തന്നെ അതേപടി ബൈ ഹാർട്ട് ചെയ്തിട്ട് അങ്ങനെ തന്നെ എഴുതണമെന്ന് യാതൊരു നിർബന്ധമില്ല. But it should be about the poem. All the major details of the poem should be included in your answer. Only that is necessary, not that every line in this textbook has to be learned by heart. That is not necessary. So now, see, whatever source gives you a very good idea about the given poem, use that source. That is what I would like to suggest. So now into the next poem, which is When the Assault Was Intended on the City. When the Assault Was Intended on the City is Milton's 8th sonnet. The previous one was the 18th sonnet, and this is the 8th sonnet. It was written by Milton in 1642 in the form of a serious joke. So he imagines that he has been in London during the period when King Charles I and his army attacked England. So he's imagining that he had been at that place and he had been a part of the city when this attack took place. So kind of a serious joke, a product of his imagination. What might have happened if he was there while the attack took place? The poem's fancy is that it should be written out on a piece of paper, which is then pinned to the outside of the door and acts as a means of an appeal to spare the life of the poet who hovers inside. So actually he meant to place this poem outside his door in order to request the people who are involved in the attack, who are attacking, to just spare his life. അപ്പൊ സ്വന്തം ജീവിതം രക്ഷിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു കവിത എഴുതിയിട്ട് വാതിൽ മേൽ ഒട്ടിക്കുക എന്നുള്ളതായിരുന്നു ഇദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ താല്പര്യം. അതാണ് ഈ ഒരു കവിതയെ ഏറ്റവും രസകരമാക്കുന്നത്. He wanted to pin it on the outside of his door, which can act as a request and appeal to the attackers to spare his life. അപ്പൊ എന്റെ ജീവൻ രക്ഷിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട്, ഞാൻ എന്റെ ജീവൻ രക്ഷിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് സ്വയം എഴുതിയ ഒരു കവിത, അത് വാതിലിൽ അറ്റാക്ക് നടക്കുന്ന സമയത്ത് അവിടെ അദ്ദേഹം ഉണ്ടായിരിക്കുന്നു, അതുപോലെ അത് വാതിൽപ്പടിയിൽ ഒട്ടിക്കുന്നു, അത് ആൾക്കാർ കാണുന്നു, അയാളുടെ ജീവിതം തിരിച്ചു കൊടുക്കും, കൊല്ലാതിരിക്കുന്നു, അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെയാണ് ഇദ്ദേഹം ഇമാജിൻ ചെയ്യുന്ന ഈ ഒരു കവിതയിൽ. So it's the poem's appeal is to the reader's imagination. He invites readers to imagine that the poet pins this sonnet to his door to protect his property during the military attack. It's a plea for special protection for poets in the time of war. So all these things are discussed in the poem. The rhyme scheme of the poem is ABBA, ABBA, DED, and EDE. It's written in the conventional iambic pentameter. It also has iambic pentameter in it, and it has the rhyme scheme ABBA, ABBA, DED, and EDE. Keep that in mind. Actually, a poem which he just imagines that he might have been a part of London when the attack of King Charles I and his army took place in London, and the way he might find out a means of escape by writing poem and writing a sonnet and pasting it on his door. A funny one, a serious joke, it is titled. It was written in the form of a joke, a serious joke. This is mentioned in the background to the poem. So it is all about John Milton, his 4 poems. So it is 3:30. Let me see if I can complete some more poems today. We have Andrew Marvell and John Donne left. See, at the very beginning, I told you something about John Donne. John Donne and many others, they are known as the metaphysical poets. What is meant by metaphysics or metaphysical school? See, beyond the physical. Metaphysical means beyond the physical. That is, they talk of things which are, beyond the physical world. Something which exists beyond the physical world. That is what they talk about, or that is what they use as theme. See, they were innovative poets. The leader of the metaphysical school of poetry is said to be John Donne. And what are the peculiarities of these poets or the metaphysical school of poets? See, they select themes which people have never chosen ever before. They use what is called extended metaphor, or a kind of a comparison, a conceit. Metaphysical conceit is what it is named. അവർ മെറ്റഫിസിക്കൽ കൺസീറ്റ് ആണ് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നതെന്ന് പറയും. മെറ്റഫിസിക്കൽ കൺസീറ്റ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ മറ്റൊന്നുമല്ല, വേ ഓഫ് കമ്പാരിസൺ ബിറ്റ്വീൻ 2 objects which have nothing in common. പരസ്പരം ഒരു കോമൺനെസ്സും ഇല്ലാതെ രണ്ട് വസ്തുക്കൾ തമ്മിലുള്ള കമ്പാരിസൺ ഒക്കെ നടത്തുന്നതിനാണ് മെറ്റഫിസിക്കൽ കൺസീറ്റ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. സോ ദീസ് പോയറ്റ്സ്, ദ മെറ്റഫിസിക്കൽ പോയറ്റ്സ്, they make use of what is called the metaphysical conceit in their poems. They talk of the superficial elements, they talk of the elements beyond the physical. So that is some idea about John Donne. And then you have two poems by John Donne. One is The Sun Rising, another is The Anniversary. You have three. Okay, two of them are here. The first one, poem The Sun Rising. What is the poem about? See, The Sun Rising is actually a poem about, you have three poems, and a relic is also there. The first one, The Sun Rising, is actually about the speaker, the chiding away sun. സൂര്യനെ പറഞ്ഞു വിടാൻ നോക്കുവാണ്, സൂര്യനെ വഴക്ക് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് സൂര്യനെ പറഞ്ഞു വിടാൻ നോക്കുവാണ്, ഒഴിവാക്കാൻ നോക്കുവാണ്. എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ്? ബിക്കോസ് see, the sun is disturbing him when he is making love with his beloved. സ്വന്തം കാമുകിയുമായിട്ട് അല്ല നല്ല സമയം സ്പെൻഡ് ചെയ്യുന്ന സമയത്ത് the sun is actually disturbing him. The sun is acting as a disturbance. So he wants the sun to go away, the sun to do some other work, not to disturb them in their process of making love. So look at the way the poem starts. Nobody ever started a poem like this. So you have it in page number 116. Busy old fool, unruly sun, why dost thou thus through windows and through curtains call on us? See, the sun is called busy old fool, unruly sun. You are so unruly and indisciplined. See, you should not be arriving at wrong intervals or wrong time. See, when we are busy having a nice time together, why do you disturb us? That is why he is calling the sun busy old fool. It's a direct address to the object, the sun. So this kind of a beginning, a direct addressal to the object or person, he was never before seen in English poetry. So that is another element which is a contribution of John Donne to English poetry. The way an abrupt beginning is there, there is no kind of, an introduction to the theme. An abrupt beginning is there, direct addressal to the listener is there. The whole situation can be visualized. So these are all the peculiarities of John Donne's poems. Keep them in mind. He is the leader of the metaphysical school. So you might be asked to write a short note on what is called the metaphysical school of poetry, or about John Donne himself. So you can make use of the ideas in the three poems given and write about John Donne and his poems. See, the way he uses metaphysical conceit is also important. Metaphysical conceit is nothing but comparing two objects which are totally different in character, which can never be compared, or which we normally do not find any commonness in. തമ്മിൽ ഒരു കോമൺനെസ്സും കാണാത്ത രണ്ട് വസ്തുക്കളെ തമ്മിലുള്ള കമ്പാരിസൺ ഒക്കെ ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ട് അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് സംസാരിക്കുന്നതാണ് മെറ്റഫിസിക്കൽ കൺസീറ്റ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. One very good example is that he actually uses the conceit of a compass for the two lovers. See, the instrument box will have a compass, and what is so peculiar about the compass, it will have two sharp ends. So what the poet says is, see, the one which is stable is his beloved, and the one which is always moving is me. അങ്ങനെ കോമ്പസിന്റെ രണ്ടറ്റം, രണ്ട് ഷാർപ്പ് എൻസിനെയും വെച്ചുകൊണ്ട് ഒരു കമ്പാരിസൺ നടത്തുന്നു. സ്നേഹിതനും ഡണ്ണും തമ്മിലുള്ള ഒരു കമ്പാരിസൺ. സോ വി ആർ ലൈക്ക് ദി ടു എൻഡ്സ് ഓഫ് എ compass എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ടൊരു comparison. See, how can a compass, such a sharp object, be compared to love, to lovers actually? So this kind of a comparison is most common in the metaphysical poets. Then you have another poem which is The Anniversary. See, if I make clever selections of poems from all the 76 poems given, I will not actually look into this particular poem much, because as far as John Donne is concerned, his most famous poem is Sun Rising. From among the list given to you, his most famous poem is Sun Rising. So expect this poem for the exam. The other poems you can just go through, read about them, but those poems are not that necessary or that important. See, another poem is The Relic. You can simply read about these poems, keep some points in mind, but most often these two poems are not there in the previous question papers. They might not be there in your question paper as well. So this is the end of block 1. Then we have block 2, which talks about long 18th century, BEGE 106, long 18th century. See, for this paper or this particular block, what I want you to do is, it's almost 3:42. Can you just go through the two poems and come? Because these two poems are quite lengthy. They are given, one of them is given as an appendix. It is given towards the end of the block. You'll have to go through the poem and come for the next class. Will you be able to do that? Then only you will understand anything about it. You simply go through the poems and come for the next class. Will you do that? So please do that. Sister, shall we stop? Hello, sister.
Hello?
Sister, shall we stop?
Yes.
Okay, sister.